My name's Danielle. My older brother Kyle and I grew up close in age but very different in temperament. Kyle was always the confident, outspoken one, quick with opinions and even quicker with jokes that occasionally landed harder than he intended, or perhaps exactly as hard as he intended. I met James in my mid-20s, when he was working as a mid-level project coordinator at a logistics company, quietly building an idea on the side for a software platform that would eventually streamline supply chain tracking for small and mid-sized shipping companies. He was thoughtful, unassuming, genuinely brilliant in a way that didn't announce itself loudly at family dinners. Kyle, meanwhile, had built a comfortable career in commercial sales, confident and successful by conventional measures, and had developed a habit over the years of measuring other people's worth fairly explicitly against his own visible markers of success. Job titles, salary figures, the kind of achievements you could summarize in a single sentence at a dinner party. The comment came at our engagement dinner, a relatively small gathering of close family celebrating James's proposal a few weeks earlier. Kyle had a few drinks in him by the time he stood to offer what was supposed to be a warm toast to the happy couple. "Look," he said, grinning in the way that always preceded something he thought was clever. "I'm happy for you both, genuinely. But no offense, James. You're kind of a nobody right now, aren't you? Working some coordinator job, tinkering with some side project nobody's heard of. I just hope you can actually keep up with my sister long term, because she's used to a certain kind of success around her." The table laughed in that uncomfortable way people laugh when something technically qualifies as a joke, but clearly carries real judgment underneath it. James, to his credit, simply smiled, raised his own glass slightly, and said something gracious about looking forward to proving himself over time, diffusing the moment without giving Kyle the satisfaction of an actual reaction. I was furious privately, though I chose not to make a scene at my own engagement dinner. James asked me afterward, genuinely, not to hold on to anger toward Kyle on his behalf. He said simply that time would clarify things far more effectively than an argument at a dinner table ever could. James continued developing his supply chain software platform over the following 2 years, working evenings and weekends around his day job, eventually reaching a point where the product was mature enough to pursue seriously. He left his coordinator position to focus on it full-time, a decision that worried me deeply at the time, given how much financial security we were choosing to risk. The first 18 months of his startup were genuinely difficult. Thin margins, slow client acquisition, several moments where we seriously discussed whether he should return to a stable salaried position instead. James persisted, refining the platform based on direct client feedback, gradually building a reputation within the logistics industry as offering something genuinely more efficient than the legacy systems most companies were still using. By our third year of marriage, the company had grown enough to require actual employees beyond James alone, and by our fifth year, it had become a legitimate, respected player in supply chain technology, with a client roster including several notable regional and national shipping companies, and a workforce that had grown to just under 60 employees. Kyle's own career, meanwhile, took a considerably rockier path over those same 5 years. His sales company went through a significant restructuring about 3 years after our engagement dinner, and Kyle, despite years of seniority, found himself among a round of layoffs that hit mid-level sales positions particularly hard. He bounced between two subsequent positions over the following 2 years, neither of which worked out particularly well, one ending in another round of layoffs, the other ending when Kyle, by his own later admission, struggled to adapt to a workplace culture considerably more demanding than what he'd grown accustomed to earlier in his career. By the time James's company had grown into the established, respected business it had become, Kyle was working a considerably less prestigious sales position, visibly frustrated with how his career trajectory compared to the confident, successful narrative he'd always maintained about himself in family settings. Kyle reached out to James directly about 5 years after that engagement dinner, initially through a somewhat awkward text message asking if they could catch up, which both James and I understood immediately probably meant something more specific than simple catching up. They met for coffee, and Kyle, after some uncomfortable small talk, explained that he'd heard James's company was hiring for a senior account management position and that he'd love to be considered, given his years of sales experience. James reviewed the actual job posting details with Kyle honestly, explaining that the position specifically required experience with enterprise-level supply chain software sales, technical fluency with the platform-specific logistics integrations, and a track record of managing complex, multi-stakeholder accounts, none of which matched Kyle's actual sales background, which had been built almost entirely around considerably simpler consumer product sales cycles. Kyle pushed back somewhat, suggesting his general sales experience should translate reasonably well regardless of the specific industry differences. James, patient but honest, explained that the role genuinely required specific technical and industry knowledge that Kyle didn't currently possess, and that hiring him without that foundation would set Kyle up for genuine struggle rather than success. What James did next surprised me, honestly, given everything Kyle had said at our engagement dinner years earlier. Rather than simply declining Kyle's request outright, James offered him something more genuinely useful: an honest conversation about what specific skills and certifications Kyle would need to develop if he genuinely wanted to transition into enterprise technology sales, along with several concrete suggestions for training programs and entry-level positions in adjacent fields that could realistically build toward that goal over time. James also offered to personally review Kyle's resume and provide honest, direct feedback on how to position his existing experience more effectively for the kinds of roles he was actually qualified to pursue immediately, rather than the specific senior position that had prompted the initial conversation. I asked James privately why he'd extended that kind of genuine help to someone who'd publicly dismissed him as a nobody at our own engagement dinner. He told me, simply, that holding on to that moment wouldn't actually improve his own life in any way, and that genuinely helping Kyle navigate a difficult career stretch felt considerably more valuable than any satisfaction he might get from simply declining out of old resentment. Kyle called me a few days after that meeting, considerably more subdued than I'd heard him in years. He acknowledged, somewhat awkwardly, that James had been more generous with his time and advice than Kyle probably deserved, given the engagement dinner comment neither of us had ever directly discussed since it happened. "I said something stupid 5 years ago," Kyle admitted. "I don't think I actually meant it as harshly as it came out, but I also can't pretend I didn't believe some version of it at the time. Watching what he's actually built, and then having him still take the time to genuinely help me instead of just enjoying watching me struggle, honestly, that hit harder than if he'd just said no." I told Kyle I appreciated him saying that, and that James genuinely wasn't interested in punishing him for an old comment, just in being straightforward about what the current situation actually required. Kyle eventually pursued one of the training certifications James had suggested, and about 8 months later, secured a legitimate mid-level position at a different technology company, a genuine step forward built on actual qualification rather than family connection. Our family dynamic has shifted noticeably since then. Kyle's comments about James have become considerably more respectful, not performatively so, but reflecting what seems like a genuine recalibration of how he measures other people's worth against his own particular yardstick of visible success. James never brought up the engagement dinner comment directly during any of this, and honestly, he didn't need to. 5 years of consistent, genuine work had already answered Kyle's dismissive comment far more effectively than any argument at that dinner table ever could have. If this story got to you, the next one is even more unexpected. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it.